continues on WDBO.
Whether you're hearing a sound when you're driving that shouldn't be there, maybe your steering wheel is shaking around too much and you want to get that checked out, or a question you want to run by Larry Perry, the magic mechanic himself, now is the time to call up. How are you doing today, Larry?
We're doing fantastic. Appreciate it. Well, it's 3 o'clock. Hi, folks. I'm Larry Perry, and you're tuned in to the Magic Mechanic Radio Show. So new listeners know this is kind of an interactive automotive and mechanical advice program where we help you with your car problems and, well, I guess just about anything mechanical. And it's been our pleasure to do so for over 31 years. Me personally, I'm an automotive shop owner, and I've been a master automotive technician since 1982. And remember, all your calls and car questions are getting indexed and placed on our new Magic Mechanic YouTube channel. So other folks searching for answers like yours will be able to get the same needed information. Think about that. Folks will be able to play your car questions back and hear my comments 100 years from now. So we will live in infamy, as they say. Dash warning lights, poor fuel economy, oil consumption, AC not working correctly, vibrations, warranty questions, antique and classic car issues on any gas, hybrid, electric, or diesel vehicle. Also remember, I have a complete database of all listed recalls and technical service bulletins from 1980 to, well, current 2000 and even 23s. You can also ask your car question by emailing me, larry@magicmechanic.com. We get several emails during the course of the program, and I can't guarantee I'll get to them during the show, but if I can't fit them in, I will answer it by the first of the week. You are going to be indexed and placed on our new YouTube channel, so you're going to become a internet star, as they say, and it'll be curious to see how many hits, your car questions will actually get, because, see, they'll all be indexed. This is really going to be cool. Somebody call in and say they got a 2000 Honda Civic and the AC's not working right. And, you'll be able to go back and actually see just how many folks have actually went to that car question and received the same information that you did. And the best part about it is, too, the price. Well, you can't beat the price. The price is absolutely free. So go ahead and hop on board. Be part of our program. We've done it for over 31 years. I think we fixed a car or two in that time period. So if you've never called in before, be one of the first-time callers. Join us. Like I said, it takes your calls and me to make the show successful. All right, with that being said, let's head on over to Tom in Kissimmee. Tom, tell us what's going on with your Jaguar.
How you doing, Larry? This is the thing. If my brother has a 2000 Jaguar XJ8, he recently changed out the transmission. It's been like 8 months ago. And since then, the transmission was working fine. However, it seemed like the lines to the transmission, the connection or something, it was leaking during that time, and it leaked out to about 2 quarts low in that fluid. Now, it seemed like that, by doing that, it might have caused damage to the pump and maybe the gears, because the gearbox mode went on. I was wondering if you would think that would happen to that if it's 2 quarts low.
Has he got an original? Is this the original transmission that's in the car?
No, actually, this was the second transmission that he had installed, and like about a year before that.
Okay, and it was after that. Has it been leaking ever since he had the transmission replaced, or was this something that actually occurred after the work was done?
It seemed like it occurred after the work, because the car was running fine for the duration of about 8 months.
Okay. Has anybody put it on a rack to actually look and see where the leak originated from?
Well, yeah, so they put it on the rack. They noticed this 2 quarts low, and that the line, for the transmission, was seems to be bad.
Okay. Well, in some cases, what will happen, Tom, is, on an older vehicle, we'll have transmission cooler lines that'll like go into a radiator or whatever, because the radiator a lot of times will contain the transmission cooler. And what winds up happening in some cases is when you go to try to break those lines loose, sometimes you'll have a problem getting them out. And a lot of times what they'll do, if they need to loosen or remove a line, they'll cut the line and then go back with a transmission cooler hose and just put clamps on it and tighten it down that way. And a lot of times if they've got rubber hoses, the transmission cooler lines, kind of splicing the metal lines together, a lot of times they'll start leaking. And you can, easily lose fluid through them. What I would do, is the transmission cooler lines for that car, they're probably not available, but what we typically wind up doing in a case like this is we will usually either get brake or steel fuel line and actually run new cooler lines from the transmission cooler back to the transmission. Now, you're right in questioning whether whether this could have hurt the transmission. It's never good to run a transmission low on fluid. When you lose hydraulic pressure like that, clutches can actually slip, and when they do, they can actually kind of burn themselves a little bit. But if it wasn't something that was, ran low on fluid for a long period of time, probably be able to put some fluid back in it, fix the leak, and at least give it a try and see what happens. Just because it was a little bit low on fluid, there is no guarantee that it actually is detrimental and actually took the transmission itself out. And it being a fresh transmission, not that old, I would expect it probably still be all right. But if need be, the transmission cooler lines can be made. It just takes a technician some time to do it and somebody willing to do the work. But if the lines are in poor condition and they need to be replaced, somebody's going to need to pull the old ones off and use them as a pattern and just build brand new steel lines going from the transmission back to the transmission cooler in the radiator itself. Regardless if the transmission's hurt or not, somebody is going to have to go in there and actually build the transmission lines and get the leak fixed just to find out if the transmission's still good or not. But in this particular instance, it just being a couple quarts low on fluid and starting to slip because it's low on fluid, I wouldn't rule the transmission out yet. I'd fix the leaks and get the lines repaired and then go back and see what we got. So I hope that gives you a hand there, Tom. I hope that helps you, buddy. 4-barrel quadrajet carburetor on it, like the factory carburetor that came on the vehicle, and he's questioning. Said it's hard to start whenever it sits for a few days. It's not an everyday driver, of course. So when he gets in it to go start it up, he'll pump the gas pedal a couple times and go to crank it up. And he says he cannot hardly ever get it started. So he usually has to pour a little bit of gasoline down inside the carburetor in order for it to start up. And he goes ahead and he mentions that he had sent the carburetor out and had it rebuilt a while back, and said that didn't seem to help it any. And the reason I thought this was a good email is because anybody that has the same type of situation with an older GM car, especially a quadrajet carburetor that's on it, what a lot of folks don't understand is when they drill the passages inside these for your air and fuel, they have to seal these where they drill into them back up. And the way they do that is they'll use these lead plugs. They'll install them when they're hot, and then when they cool down, they'll seal these passages up. And in the float bowl of these carburetors, those lead plugs, where they install them, we're talking all the way back to 1969 in this case, those lead plugs will start leaking, and they will leak all the fuel out of the float bowl down into the intake, and that fuel will evaporate. And when it does, you'll go to start the car back up after it's set for a week or a month or whatever. There will be no fuel residual fuel in the carburetor. It will have all leaked out and evaporated. Then when you go to start it back up, the mechanical fuel pump that's on the car is having to produce enough fuel all the way back up into the float bowl before you can actually get it to restart. And what we have a procedure, and I've used it for years and years. When those carburetors come apart, you can actually take the float bowl, turn them upside down, and we'll take like a flat punch, and we will restake those two big lead plugs in the bottom of those carburetors, and then just take a hammer and lightly tap all the way around them. And then you sit there and you go, well, that sounds, the lead plugs are kind of like a cone, a conical type of shape. And so when you reseat them, that reseals them, and then you brad the edges, and that holds them in place. Now, before you go and put the carburetor back together, you want to put them up on a you want to take like a punch, put it in a vise, and just stick it up there, and then just set the carburetor down over top of it, or the float bowl. Put gasoline in the float bowl and let it set, at least overnight, and come back and make sure that there's no residual leaking. When you get no residual leaking out of those lead plugs in the bottom of those float bowls, then of course you can go ahead and reassemble the carburetor, put it on there, and it'll work like it did when it was brand new. So just a little carburation secret there. I know that everybody out there with a newer vehicle with its fuel injected doesn't even need to even know about that. But you know what? There's somebody out there with an older vehicle and a quadrojet fighting this same issue, because it's very common, especially on your older classic and muscle cars. So I hope that not only helps you, Jerry, but I hope that helps a lot of folks out there that we may even run into at the Cars and Coffee events here in Central Florida on time to time. With that being said, let's move on to Kevin. Kevin's got looks like a 2014 Buick. Kevin, tell us what's going on with that car.
Yeah, I'm getting a service debilitation message, and when I go to turn into like a parking spot or something like that, it'll lose power where I lose power steering. It's pretty dangerous. You know? I was just wondering what could cause it and what the remedy would be.
Kevin, let me ask you this. How many miles do you have on that 2014 Buick Verano?
About 55K.
Okay, that's not very many miles. First thing that I would want to do is, me personally, everything that I own's got, I think, electric power steering. Even my four-wheeler, if you can believe that, has an electric power steering system, but I don't like them. I just don't like electronic power steering because of what you're dealing with here. When your steering becomes inconsistent and you can't depend on it, that's a dangerous thing. In your case, it's probably something either with a steering sensor or either the electric power steering unit itself. Those are complete modules. There's an electric motor that actually assists you to steer the vehicle, and when they go bad, they can create a lot of issues, and they can be extremely dangerous when you're driving. Kevin, in your particular case, this is what I want you to do, and take me up on this. I want to do a full blown TSB and recall search on your car. I'm not going to be able to do it because we're getting ready to break for the news right now, but what I'd like for you to do is email me this, Larry@magicmechanic.com. Let me do a full TSB, technical service bulletin, and recall look on this. Even though it's a 2014, if I'm not mistaken, I think there was some sort of a special policy adjustment. It was around 2013 or 14 that GM in general, not just Buick and that Verano, but there was a few vehicles that were affected by this same exact thing. We might be able to find you, even though it's a few years old, there still may be some warranty assistance out there. Email me that and let me see if I can give you a hand with it. If not, we can take care of it. That's not a problem, but it needs to be scanned, and you need to be extremely cautious with this vehicle until this issue is resolved.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Coming up next, we got a question from, or maybe a follow-up from Todd following the break. Todd followed some advice that Larry gave him a couple of weeks ago, and he wants to let you know how exactly that went down.
We have open lines. We'll get to your calls actually pretty quick, and don't forget we are indexing all of our calls to go on our new Magic Mechanic YouTube channel. So anything that we get here on the air is going to be put on YouTube, and that way other folks that are looking for the same types of questions that you are, so it's going to become, easy obtainable knowledge, so hopefully the less secrets we have in the automotive repair world, the better off we'll be. Yeah, I want to mention before we get to your rest of your calls here, and this has become such a plague that I have to talk about this, and it's the Dodge and Jeep Pentastar 3.6 engines. And folks, listen, this is, why they haven't literally put out some technical service bulletins or something about changing oil viscosity, it is beyond me. But I'm gonna go through the list here. It's Chrysler 300s, the Pacificas, the Voyagers, the Dodge Challengers and Chargers, the Durangos, the Jeep Gladiator, Jeep Wrangler, Jeep Cherokee, even the Dodge Ram, and especially the Dodge ProMaster vans. They use that 3.6 V6 engine, and it's a pretty strong motor. Considering the applications that they put this little V6 in, those ProMaster vans. Well, people in the fleet, construction business, plumbing, AC. They buy them things and they load them down, so they get a pretty good workout. The problem that we're running into with these is the oil that they're using in them. They're recommending like these 0-20 oils, and they're just not enough viscosity there to get any life expectancy out of these things. And these are expensive engines to replace, and it's to the point where they're getting scarce for us to even get. Jasper is literally, they can't build these things fast enough, and so we wind up with vehicles on the lot. We're sitting there sometimes waiting 30 days to get a motor. Just because there is none. You can't even buy a new one. They're on national back order through the manufacturer. So it's really becoming a problem. And for folks that depend on these things to make a living with, you're going to have to rethink the oil that's being put in these. You can't use that 0-20. You need to move up to, I would recommend going to an AMSOIL 0W30. You still got a low cold pour point, but you still got, that gives you 33% more viscosity, basically more engine protection. And with it being AMSOIL, a polyalpha-olefin synthetic, you can't beat that for lubrication. There's nothing made on this planet that's better than that. Now, the problem that happens is, see, on the rocker arms on these engines, there's no intentional lubrication going to the roller tips on these rockers. And so what happens is that the 0-20 oil is so thin, it won't stay with those rollers to keep them lubricated, the bearings in them lubricated properly. So the bearings go bad and those little roller tips go sideways. And what happens is it'll knock the keepers that holds the valve springs onto your valves. And the valves will drop down in the cylinder and the pistons hit the valves, and it's just a horrible meeting. It just destroys the motor. And most of those engines can't be rebuilt because they do so much block damage and cylinder head damage. Those blocks can't even be rebuilt. That's the reason we're running into a shortage of 3.6 engines. They are totally destroyed when they come apart. Now, if you've got one of these and you hear a ticking noise in the engine, my advice is to quit driving the daggone thing. Get it into a shop as soon as you possibly can. And usually we can go and we can replace the rocker arms on these things. Then we can switch them to a diet of nothing but 0-30 AMSOIL, and you'll get 200,000 or 300,000 miles out of those little 3.6 motors. But if you keep running that 0-20 in them, and especially if you hear a ticking noise and you keep driving these daggone things, you are going to wind up with an $8,000 to $10,000 $1,000 repair bill. I mean, and that's if you're lucky enough to be able to get a new motor. So, if you got a Jeep or any of those vehicles that I mentioned, or if you know somebody that does, kind of share this with them, because, I mean, they're just sitting ducks. I mean, it's just, I don't know how else to describe or express this, but that 0-20 does not work in those engines. And let me tell you a little bit of a difference why. See, all these hydro-cracked oils that are considered synthetic, or they put synthetic on the label, it's nothing but a joke. Those are all hydro-cracked petroleum oils. They're not real synthetic oils. Polyalpha olefin oils are real synthetic oils. They run to heat and friction, and they won't release and go away from a particular part until the engine cools down. Well, that's what you want with oil. You don't want it to run away from heat and friction. But that's the only types of oils that will actually keep those 3.6s in business. If you run hydro-cracked to 0-20 oils in these things, you're going to be lucky to get 100,000 mile out of those vehicles. And a lot of them fail sooner than that. So, just kind of heed my warning. And that's your Jeeps, that's your Dodges, Chrysler products, any of them with that 3.6 V6 motor in them. They call them Pentastar engines. So if you know anybody that's got one of them, or if you have one of them yourself, do yourself a favor. Highly consider switching it over to the AMSOIL 0W30. It gives you a little more viscosity, and you've got an oil in there that's actually going to run and attack that friction that takes place on those rollers on those rocker arms. All right, well, I've said my piece. Now let's head over and talk to Todd here in Orlando. Todd, tell me what's going on with your truck.
Hey, Magician Larry.
How you doing, Todd?
I'm good. A couple months ago, I reported on my 2013 F-150 with the 5-liter V8 that I was getting 14 and a half miles to the gallon, which was a big drop. And I changed the master airflow sensor, cleaned the throttle body, no good. And I called you, and you said, go get the factory radiator cap. And I did. And I am over 20 miles per gallon on the highway.
You mean thermostat, right?
The thermostat. Yes.
Thermostat. Yeah. Isn't that amazing what a thermostat can do for fuel economy?
Yes. I mean, at 15 miles to the gallon or 14 and a half, it was killing me. It is. And Todd, that thermostat can get 5 degrees out of calibration, and that computer system will sit there and start making that thing dump more fuel than it ever needed in its lifetime. And people sit around and they're like, man, my gas mileage. And see, the vehicle runs perfect. You won't notice a thing different on it, except your gas mileage just gone to heck. And then you go and we would get cars in, and we would go and we would do a cooling system service and put a new thermostat in a car and use a Stant or a Gates thermostat, an aftermarket thermostat. And these people would come back and they'd say, I don't know what you did to my car, but this thing has went from 25, 30 miles to the gallon, and it's off 7 and 8 miles to the gallon. We look at each other and go, what did we just put a thermostat and new antifreeze in this car? How in the world could we screw it up? There's that much difference between a manufacturer's thermostat and an aftermarket one, and don't let anybody kid you, because just like you're living, breathing proof it's true. But if you would have put another thermostat in there, an aftermarket one, that thing probably you may have noticed a little bit of increase in fuel economy, but not what you're dealing with now. But all those thermostats, when they get older, see what it is, they'll let the engine run just a little bit cooler than what they're supposed to. Well, that computer it's targeted. It's looking for a target temperature. And if your engine's running anything below that, then of course it's going to add additional unneeded fuel, and your gas mileage suffers on the count of it. And in your case, holy cow, what is that? Josh, you're going to have to pull out your calculator on this. What is it, about a 20% decrease in fuel economy over a thermostat? That is outrageous. Todd, thanks for your call. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Todd, and I appreciate We've only known each other a few weeks here, Larry, but you know that I'm not very smart when it comes to basic math. So, yes, I carry my handy calculator with me wherever I go. Let's waste no time. Let's head over to Orlando, where David has a question about his Explorer. Go ahead, David.
Hello, Larry. You will actually be a magician if you can pull this one out. 2009 Ford Explorer 4x4 has the RSC alarm that always goes off, and when you go online, this is a tragic Ford phenomenon where they're not producing the parts to repair this. I've taken it to many different mechanics, and they say the RSC control module needs to be replaced, but the parts aren't available, and that alarm goes off every 5-10 minutes while you're driving. It's an audible alarm inside the car.
David, listen, is there any... I'm sure it's been scanned correctly.
It's been scanned by, a couple of different mechanics here in Orlando, yes. And some of their solutions are, because Ford doesn't make the part, they say to go to a junkyard and pick one up, but then we've been told that it has to be within a certain VIN range to fit your particular car. And the chances of finding that are, like the Holy Grail.
David, I'll tell you, I don't... now, I'm not just patting myself on the back here, but listen, I don't just deal with... when I get stuff in that you can't even imagine. Old, antique, very few made. I deal with the world when it comes to looking for a part. I deal with junkyards in Dubai, for goodness sakes. So there's not very many things that I can't get. I can get just about anything for a customer's car. Even when they just pulled the plug and give up on it, I can usually come up with a part. Or either we rebuild it or have it rebuilt or whatever. In your case, I'm going to tell you, I'm very aware of the problem that this vehicle's got. We even have that same vintage Explorer in our rental fleet at the shop. And we've had that problem with it as well. But this was what we found with it. We don't have to replace the modules like you've been told in most cases. What we usually find on these is an exciter ring that'll crack on them. It'll be usually one of the wheels. Sometimes a rear is a common one, where a little rust will develop underneath what Ford calls them a tone ring. I just call them an exciter ring. And that's what the wheel speed sensor is actually measuring. And it measures that for a lockup, or if you were to encounter a lockup. And if there's a problem with that, see, that system goes bananas because it's trying to prevent a rollover, and it'll think that you may have one of your rear wheels locked up or something, and of course then it goes into this rollover prevention type of mode, through the anti-lock brake module. The module itself, it's very rare. I've had to replace them because of this issue. It's usually wheel speed related. Now, this is how you find out for sure. We use the Ford IDS system, which is basically a laptop, and we can analyze any part that there is on your car. And then we can take it and we can drive it and we can look at all the data. I'd want to see exactly what the wheel speed data is for the fronts and the rears. And it's easy to do. All we're doing is looking to make sure that we're getting a reading, number one, off of all of them, and when you're driving down the road, that they're all reading comparatively. They're all picking and dispersing the same voltages back to your computer and to, of course, our scan equipment. And that's what needs to be done first. And chances are you probably have one that is misreading. And that's common if one of those exciter rings, it's just a cogged ring. And see, that's what the wheel speed sensor has to measure by. And if those things crack, and they do, it's very common. You could Google search Ford Explorer tone ring broken, and you're going to read all this about the rollover stability control and everything else, but it's a tone ring that usually winds up breaking on these things and causes all these problems. And it's really amazing to me that everybody's going right straight to the control module instead of, I think, going to the source of the problem, because you're going to spend a whole lot of time looking and replacing something that's probably not going to fix the vehicle any daggone way. But that's what needs to be done, and it's one of those things, David, to where all a good tech has to do is pull this up on a scan tool, drive the vehicle, and compare all of the wheel speed sensor voltages, every stinking one of them. And if there's one that's out of whack, that's why you're having this problem, you know. And I was looking at this stuff earlier on another one, and there's people, you go online, there's people telling you how to disconnect your ABS system so you can get rid of the beeping noise. I'm like, these folks are crazy. They're going to get somebody killed over something so stupid that they don't know how to diagnose it. That's why we're taking these, and we're indexing them, questions like this, and we're putting them all on YouTube, so that way other folks throughout the country can actually pull this stuff up and at least get a clue, for God's sakes. When it comes to automotive diagnostic stuff anymore, David, to be honest with you, that there's not a lot of talent out there left, and so I want to share what little bit I know with folks, so just help them a little bit, maybe give them a little guidance. But in your case there, number one, don't give up on it yet. It can be fixed, but first we got to find out what all those wheel speed sensors are reading. Thanks for your call, and don't be a stranger. Folks, our sponsors are very important to the show. We all pitch in to bring you the program every week, so if you enjoy it, please patronize our sponsors and tell them you heard about them here on the Magic Mechanic Radio Show. Orlando Auto Upholstery, interior, convertible tops, carpet, seats, whether it be on a car, truck, van, boat, RV, ATV, it doesn't matter. Any type of upholstery, any type of interior. Maybe you're in the middle of a restoration project and you're just time to go ahead and get the seats and door panels and stuff done. Just give Orlando Auto Upholstery a call. You can visit them at orlandooautoupholstery.com or give them a ring at 407-898-2351. You'll be glad you did. They're great guys. These are artisan workers. I mean, literally, to fabricate and do this type of work anymore is a rarity. That actually does all the sewing and seaming and the hand work. It's art is basically what it is, and these guys are fantastic at it. Amsoil synthetic lubricants for your car, truck, van, SUV, boat, motorcycle, anything with an internal combustion engine. Amsoil makes a lubricant for it, and you got to remember, Amsoil actually warranties your engine against lubrication failure as long as you use their oil. Think about that. That's like, okay, I'm going to use the best oil and get the maximum amount of mileage out of my engine, and Amsoil is going to warranty my motor against lubrication failure as long as I use their oil. Now, let me see here. What else would a person have to think about in order to consider switching to the best engine lubricant? Amsoil is going to warranty my motor. I only have to change it about once a year every 15,000 miles, or I can send the oil out for analysis and continue using it if the analyst comes back okay. I mean, folks, it's the biggest bang for your buck. You're not going to find better engine lubrication than that. If you're going to keep a car for a long period of time, to be honest with you, unless you just want to spend mad money on it, you have no choice really when it comes down to engine lubrication. If you want to find out more, amsoil.com. You're always welcome to email me, Larry at magicmechanic.com, and ask me what viscosity should you use in your particular car. I think we have a couple car questions lined up asking the same thing. So don't let that those are the most two important things. What oil you use and the viscosity has become very, very, very important because the manufacturers recommend these are way too thin, especially for Central Florida driving. And next up, we got Jasper engines and transmissions. When it comes time to, if you do lose an engine or a transmission, you can always take it back to a dealer. They probably wouldn't be able to get a transmission or engine anyway because they're all on national back order. They're having a hard time even getting motors and transmissions for their new vehicles, let alone replacement engines and transmissions. That's where Jasper comes in. We get a Jasper transmission or engine, we put it in your vehicle, test drive it, make sure it's all good to go. You take the vehicle, you've got a 100,000 mile nationwide warranty, parts and labor on that engine and transmission. You can go, I guess a person could go and try shopping for maybe save $100 or something, but you're not going to get that type of a warranty on any other reman motor or transmission. If you're going to repower one, do it right, make it an investment, not just a temporary repair. Make sure you get a Jasper engine or transmission. So unless you buy a used engine that's got 10 miles on it, your best bet is to go with a Jasper. And it's really hard to find good low mileage used engines like we used to. The insurance companies are trying to keep these things together because of the price of replacement vehicles, and so they're keeping these things on the road even if they've been totaled almost. And so by the time the salvage yards wind up with them, a used motor transmission, they got 150, 200,000 miles on them. So you don't want that. You go with something new and got a heck of a warranty on it. JasperEngines.com. And of course, last but not least, my place, the Magic Mechanic Auto Service Center, located in Orlando, Florida. Engines, transmissions, brakes, suspension, steering, electrical repairs, and of course, AMSOIL synthetic lubricants. You can visit us at magicmechanic.com, or you can email me your car questions directly, Larry@magicmechanic.com. Let's head over and talk to Lewis here in Orlando. Got a 99 Camry. Tell me what's going on with this thing, Lewis.
Hey, how you doing? Thank you for taking my call.
No problem.
What I'm experiencing is when I started on after I've left the car sit, like say overnight, I'm experiencing blue smoke coming out. So I'm afraid it may be the valve stem seals or perhaps a piston ring. I'm not sure.
Are you adding a lot of oil to it, Lewis?
I'm missing about a quarter of a quart a month I've been adding.
Okay, so it's not a lot. What you're describing is valve guide seals, pretty much point blank. On that engine, it's kind of like this. I have replaced valve guide seals with the head on the car, but it's not for the faint of heart. I will tell you that. It is very, very, very difficult to do valve guide seals with the head still bolted to the block. Is this a car, Lewis, that you're really kind of thinking about just hanging on to for a while?
Well, yes. I just took 2 years from an older couple, and it hit 90,000 miles.
Oh,
and that's me putting about 10,000. Yeah.
Yeah, geez, that's good transportation for a long time to come. Listen, this is the if it was mine, or let's say I was fixing this car out for a customer and I wanted them, to be able to keep it on the road for a long period of time, I'd bite the bullet. I'd pull the head off of it. I'd send it out to the machine shop. Let them go ahead and do a full-blown valve job on it with all new valve guide seals. Slap it all back together with a new head gasket set, new head bolts. On that one, I believe it uses a timing belt. If it's due for that, I'd go ahead and do that as well. I'm going to be quite honest with you, and this is probably as much as you've got into the car, but you're probably going to spend a couple grand on this thing. By the time it's all done and tuned up, and new timing belt, tensioners, water pump, valve job, the whole 9 yards. But you got to look at it like this. Lewis, you could drive that car for another 10 years. If you leave it the way it is, what you're going to wind up experiencing experiencing is the oil that is seeping down between the valve stems and the valve guides. It's getting on the spark plugs and on top of the pistons. That burnt, it's turned into carbon. So what's going to wind up happening is you're going to have a very underperforming engine, and then you're going to, not only with the oil consumption, but you're also going to start eventually fouling out the spark plugs as well. It's one of them situations to where, this is not one you're going to fix with mechanic in a can. Your best bet would be to go ahead and just do a valve job on it, and get it all sealed back up. Make sure the cooling system's good to go. And like I said, you could drive this thing for another 10 years, but left the way it is, you're going to start experiencing problems, shortly, on down the road here. It won't be long. But this is something that's worth, if the car is in good shape otherwise and no more miles it's on it, then it's on the car. I'm like, this is a good investment. This is not a bad investment. I know it might sound like a lot of money, which it is, but you're better off putting that little bit of money into this car and button it up that way, and it'll give you a lot more good service. I've seen those things come in the shop with 500,000 mile on them and just still going. You just can't kill them. But the valve guide seals, if that car would have had AMSOIL in it since the day it was born, you wouldn't have this problem. Because see, AMSOIL, when it's in an engine, it keeps all the seals soft and resilient. It keeps them soft so that way retaining springs can actually pull tighter against the seals. With the oil that's been in this engine over a long period of time, which has been, who knows, probably petroleum oil, it makes the seals get hard. And when they do, they can't seal properly. And that's why you're having the issue that you're having, even though it's at a relatively very low mileage. You've got an age factor there, but it's the oil that's been used previously that's causing the problem that you have now. But I'd go ahead and do a valve job on it. I think it's well worth the investment. Lewis, thank you so much for your call, and I hope that helps you. But ring-wise, as far as your piston rings go, I would not worry about those at all. I think they're fine. It just needs the valve job done.
Steering in my Tacoma is a little bit stiff, and it's always been that way. I've never had that problem with my Chevy. My Chevy trucks are always easy to steer. But this is a little bit difficult. And it's really not too hard, but it's enough where it's an effort.
Yeah. Ken, what we wind up with, that one still uses a power steering pump. It's still a hydraulic power steering system as opposed to an electronic one, still in a 2012 Tacoma. What bases the steering ease, as far as less effort goes, on a hydraulic power steering system is the pressure relief valve in the power steering pump itself. It's like this. There's a valve in that pump, and what it does is it's spring loaded and it's set for a certain pound of pressure. And if it exceeds that, it'll bypass your steering rack and everything else, so you only get one regulated pressure and it doesn't blow anything apart. Now, it would depend on the spring pressure and how many pounds of pressure the pump was producing. Now, if a person was to go in there and probably put a little bit of a stiffer spring in that pressure relief valve in that power steering pump, it would probably make the steering easier. And that's usually what you're kind of dealing with, and on your other trucks, you mentioned Chevrolets and Fords, stuff like that. Well, it would depend on how many pounds of pressure the actual pump was producing. Now, there is other things that can cause a stiffer steering, and that is if you've got a front end part like a ball joint that's seizing up on you or something like that, which does happen quite often because, most of the front end parts, the ball joints, tire rods, stuff like that, are not serviceable to where we can't add grease to them like we did in years past. And a lot of times the grease will turn into like wax, and you won't get those parts lubricated properly. In a case like that, if we suspect something along those lines, what we do is we take the tie rod ends loose on your spindles on the left and the front, and then we turn them by hand, usually like on an alignment rack when the front end's sitting on turn plates. That way we can find out if there's a ball joint actually binding up. But if the ball joints are good and free and there's no leaks in the steering rack, usually it's just the way the pump is manufactured. And, you probably put another power steering pump on it. May make matters better, but then a person to make it even, if it is, would be still the same issue, putting a heavier spring in the pressure relief valve could possibly help matters, but there's really no guarantee, is what I'm saying. These are things that a person would have to try. But the first thing that I'd want to do is make sure there wasn't any ball joints, lower ball joints weren't binding up. That should be tested and checked. And if they're good and free, then, probably move on to something hydraulic like the pump, just not producing as much pressure to help the vehicle steer easier. So, but if you need any help with it, give us a holler. We'd be more than glad to take a look at it. But those are the issues. If you're not having to chase the steering, the ball joints are probably all right. When I say chase it, see if we got one binding up, you're constantly steering the vehicle. It doesn't want to return to center like it's supposed to. But if it's returning to center when you turn to the left or the right while you're driving it, it's going to be most likely a hydraulic type of issue. But if you're having to chase the steering with the steering wheel constantly, you probably got a ball joint that's seizing up. I hope that helps you, Ken.
This is the time of the show, Larry, where we head on over, we dive into our bag of open mics that come to us through the WDBO app. So let's waste no time and hit number one. And he's got a question for you.
Hey, good afternoon, Larry. Russ from Orlando. When your shop does a drain and fill on a transmission, what percentage of the transmission fluid is being extracted from that transmission? And how does that new transmission fluid act with the old? Could you explain to me? Thank you for your time. Enjoy the show.
Yeah, that's a good question. We've dealt with this for a long time. There is, if you've got a vehicle that's got a lot of miles on it and it's never had a pan drop done on it, it's probably a good idea to do it. Or if it's 20 years old, nobody knows when the thing was serviced last. But if you got a newer vehicle and you've got, around 60,000 mile on it, a drain and fill is probably about all you really need. See, what happens is when you drain the fluid, what's in the pan and throughout the transmission, you're still going to have some in the torque converter, of course. But when you put the new, in our case, we use the Amsoil fluid. We put it in, and if it's in a truck or whatever, it just refortifies what's already in there and gives it, higher temperature protection, especially when towing. To go and, start the vehicle up, try to suck everything that's in it possible out and put all new fluid in it, to flush everything that's in the tranny out and try to get all new fluid in there, you waste so much fluid. I'm not saying it's a bad thing to do, but, if the system holds 13 or 14 quarts, it's probably going to take over 20 to flush everything in the unit out. And if you've got pretty clean fluid already and you're maintaining it, say you're doing a first service at 60,000 mile, and you drain what's in there out, get all that out, and then top it off with like Amsoil transmission fluid, you've really got a pretty serious fluid in there to start with. And towing tests, Amsoil did the same thing. They had this was years ago, they had a 7.3 diesel Power Stroke, or a 7.3 diesel in one of their older Ford F-350s, and they had a big old huge lowboy on the back of it with a Caterpillar bulldozer, and they were putting this thing through the paces, and they were measuring transmission fluid temperatures with the OE fluid in the vehicle, and then they measured the transmission fluid temperatures with just 1 gallon of Amsoil fluid added to their factory transmission fluid, just to see what the differences would be. Just by having that 1 gallon of AMSOIL fluid, synthetic fluid, in that great big huge, I think probably close to 20 quart system, it dropped transmission fluid temperatures during their testing 75 degrees. And that's amazing that 1 gallon of fluid in a system that big is amazing. So in a lot of cases, just doing a drain and fill is perfectly fine. We have no issues with that whatsoever. But if the vehicle's got considerable miles on it, or if it is getting up in age, a pan drop doesn't hurt, and go ahead and put a new filter in it as well. I hope that helps.
Hello, Larry. This is Roy from Altamont. I recently purchased a 2008 E150 van, and it only had 32,000 miles on it. It runs good. Everything seems to be good on it and everything. But with that low mileage, I was just wondering what you would recommend me doing as far as servicing it. The fluids and everything have been maintained. The transmission fluid's nice and red.
Okay. This is my main concern, is what engine you have in that Ford van. If it is the 4.2 V6 motor, which is a good engine, I'm going to tell you point blank, it needs an intake gasket immediately due to the age. They're made out of plastic, and what happens is where the coolant flows through out of the heads and cross ports each other, those plastic intake gaskets will crack, and it will allow coolant to go right into an intake, right into a cylinder. And then when you start the engine up after it's been sitting under residual pressure, that coolant will get into a cylinder, and what will happen is it will hydro the motor when you start it up, and it'll bend the connecting rod and possibly break and go right through your oil pan, and then you'll be calling it a day, even if it's a very low mile motor. So what I'm suggesting is to if it's a 5.4 liter or 4.6 liter engine, which they also used in that van, those are pretty healthy motors. Other than just checking the vehicle over and servicing it and changing your fluids and stuff, would probably be about all that it's needed. May need some tune-up work just because of the age of the parts, but you need to pay special attention if it has the 4.2 liter motor in it. If it's a V6, you need to research. Just Google 4.2 V6 Ford engine intake gasket, and you're going to see all kinds of horror stories because of those plastic intake gaskets. That should be done on it immediately. Thanks for your open mic, folks.
Let's head on over to Kissimmee, where Thomas has a question about his Lexus. Go ahead, Thomas.
Yes, Larry. I have a 2000 Lexus. I purchased it in 2006. It had about 50,000 miles on it. Ever since then, I've been changing the oil up every 2,000 miles with conventional oil. And with the transmission, I've been changing it, draining it, and changing the filter like 4 or 5 times since then, like every 30,000 miles. And what I was wondering if, with the transmission fluid, it's pretty clean now. Should I just continue servicing it, just changing just like the filter and the 2 quarts of transmission fluid, or should I do a complete drain?
Well, I mean, if you're draining it, through the drain plug and topping it off, and the fluid's clean, you're probably in pretty good shape. I'm not really as worried about the transmission on that car as I am the engine itself. Now, you say you're using conventional oil in that motor. I'm going to tell you to stop that immediately. You cannot run conventional oil in that engine. And I'm going to tell you, even though it's an older car, if you don't put AMSOIL in that motor, chances are you're not going to get much more service out of it. And I would not tell anybody that in most cases. But this is an exception to the rule. All you have to do is put in 2000 Lexus ES300 engine sludge, or special policy adjustment, or engine failure, and you'll find out why you do not run conventional oils of any kind in that engine. You better get educated on AMSOIL really quick. Toyota and Lexus had a horrible time with those particular 3.0 liter motors back during that era. Actually, I wrote the special policy adjustment for Toyota back then to help consumers out because they could not believe what was happening to their motors. The engines completely sludge up, Thomas. They completely plug solid with sludge, especially with conventional oils. The only engines that there wasn't problems with were the engines that people used AMSOIL. That was the only engines that survived the problems. The issue that they had was they had changed head gaskets, and it increased the cylinder head combustion chamber temperature so much that the oil that folks were using turned to sludge in just a short period of time. The people weren't getting 20,000 miles out of those motors. And then Toyota come along and did a special policy adjustment where they were desludging these motors and putting bearings in them and stuff and just cleaning the mess up. A lot of the engines got replaced. But during that period of time, those were the sludge monsters of the universe. And if you continue to use petroleum oils in those, you're going to be dealing with the same thing. I don't care if you change the oil every day. It's just the engine, the combustion chamber temperatures, the cylinder head temps are so high. The conventional oils can't handle it, so they turn to sludge. I know you don't want to have to buy expensive oil, but if you don't in this case, that motor's not going to last you any length of time at all. So you better go and figure on getting you some AMSOIL 0W30. That's what it's going to take to get any life out of that engine. And you can change that oil. In this case, it's a worst case scenario because this oil is going to be tormented. But I'd run it about 7,500 miles between changes. So keep the transmission fluid clean, but you've got to use the AMSOIL 0W30 in this engine. If you don't, you may as well just go ahead and get rid of the car and get something else that you can run cheap oil in, because this engine will not handle cheap oil. I appreciate your call, Thomas.
Yes.
Hey, Wayne.
The question I have is, I completely remanufactured a 2.3 liter single overhead cam Ford 4-cylinder motor,
All right.
1978 Mustang. Got the correct hash marks. I got the correct plateau. I think everything is right for the rings. The bearing clearance is about 1.5 thousandths. I want to know what oil to use to break the motor in. I have been using Rotella T4 2030.
Yeah, you know what? I don't even think that would really be a bad idea. Me personally, I would probably use like a 530, just a Quaker State oil, non-synthetic, no semi-synthetic, no anything, just a straight regular petroleum, like a 530 Quaker State oil. I know that just sends chills up your back, but you want something to create enough friction to help you seat the rings. And then after about 3,000 miles or so, switch it over to a good synthetic like AMSOIL, and I think you'll be in good shape. But yeah, use those cheap petroleums to help seat the rings. That'll create the friction you need to get those rings seated to the cylinder wall. Thanks for your call, Wayne.
All right, thank you so much, Wayne. Let's head over to Wade, who's calling in from Ocoee. Go ahead, Wade.
You with us, Wade?
Yes. Yes, I have a 2006 Ford van. I replaced the alternator because I figured that was a problem. Prior to the alternator being replaced, it had a P1035 code. It said the sodium number 3 fillings after a high heat circuit. All right. I changed that, and then the check engine light's on, and it has a struggle to it. And now it says reflash. The secondary is that P260F is that systematically the processor performance.
Yeah. Wade, a person's going to have to actually go and do an in-depth scan on this to find out if the problem that you're having, you could be having an injector or a coil firing issue with it, to where the coil's not being fired correctly, causing a misfire on that one particular cylinder. But you've got multiple codes. So what a tech's got to do is go to the highest code number first and try to analyze, see what's going on with it, and then kind of go from there. But it's like this. It's an older vehicle. Don't be surprised if it doesn't come back as a PCM issue, actually the computer itself. But we would have to scan it in order to really be able to pinpoint and head you in the right direction with it. I hope that helps.
Thank you so much, Wade. Let's head up to Mount Verde, where Don's got a question about his 2015 Dodge. Go ahead, Don.
Hey, anybody there?
Quick, Don. We're running out of time.
Yeah, M-E-Tech, 2015, 1500. I have that truck with 67,000 miles. My brother's just let go on the third cylinder with a lifter that broke in 3 pieces.
Oh, man.
What should I do? We called the case number. They gave us the case number of Dodge. Nothing's going to happen. What do I do with the one with 67,000 miles to prevent this? It only does it when you first crank it up. You've talked about this before, I believe.
Yeah. Well, the bottom line is, Don, it's going to need lifters, and it's probably going to need at least one camshaft. The only way, and may even need the rockers. This is the deal. If you can't run 520 oil in a Dodge Hemi, I don't know what else to do. I mean, I can scream it to the top of my lungs. The only way that you're going to get any life out of a Hemi motor is to run AMSOIL 0W30. There's no other way of doing it. It'll run to heat and friction. It gives those lifters some lubrication that they otherwise would not be getting. There's no intentional lubrication for the rollers on these things. The only oil they get is just by sheer dumb luck and accident. And the only oil that is going to protect them or give them a fair chance is AMSOIL, because it runs to heat and friction and stays with it. But in your case, we've got a pretty good little job ahead of us. It's a pretty good little job to do cams and lifters on that engine. You let us know if we can help you. I know I know how to keep it from happening, but it's going to the result of the oil that's been used in there is going to have to be repaired first. Let us know if we can help you, Don. Thanks for your call. Folks, I think we're running really, really, really close on time here. John in Orlando, 21 Ram pickup truck. Email me that, Larry@magicmechanic.com. And Herb in Orlando here, listen, Hyundai with that Santa Cruz, the oil on it, you want to run if it's a turbo, you want to run the 030. And if it's a non-turbo, you want to run the 030 AMSOIL. If you got the towing question, Larry@magicmechanic.com. Folks, thanks for tuning in. You listeners, customers, show sponsors are the reason I do the show and have a job. You can tune in every Saturday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time in Central Florida on 107.3 FM, HD Radio 96.5 FM 2, and AM 580. Worldwide at WDBO.com. And click Listen Live, or just tell your smart speaker to play WDBO Radio every Saturday at 3 p.m. If you need help with your vehicle, you can always call Magic Mechanic at 407-629-2661. Visit our website, magicmechanic.com, or you can also email car questions directly to me, Larry@magicmechanic.com. Also, if you want to check it out, Magic Mechanic YouTube, find out and listen to your car question that you've asked the week prior, or listen to the show in its entirety. Until next week, be safe in and out of your car, and we'll see you back here next Saturday at 3 p.m.